All right, I'm Jalen Williams doing the visual reflection discussion. I have my notes right here, so that's probably what I'll be looking at. Okay, so to start off the reflection, I'm going to do what is it called? I'm going to do the age of slaves, 1500 to 1800. So basically, like some key takeaways I got from it was when the Europeans came over, they actually had and when they came over to like what's known as America now and like our lands now, they free blacks were actually a thing in the European colonies and things like that, and they those free blacks kind of helped pioneer the way for like kind of like that whole European age here. The first African American was free in Florida, and he in 1513, and he actually fought with the Spanish explorers during the Spanish War. And that was kind of like the tail of the thing, and we started to get African Americans started to get more popular and started to multiply over time within the like kind of the Spanish culture. And before they knew it, the Spanish ended up building Fort Mose, which is the first all black settlement town ever. And the Spanish built that just because there were so many African Americans within their culture. And through that, obviously, there were wars, and the English started to conquer. That's kind of like when slavery became like a big thing. And then a quote I pulled like towards the middle of this whole video was slavery breeds dreams of freedom in every human breast. And that's basically just the enslaved. Obviously, like you want to be free, and that's kind of like your main goal. Like you don't really think of anything else except being free and not being enslaved. African slaves read the Bible and things like that, and the one thing that was very talked about was the Promised Land. And the Promised Land for a lot of these slaves was actually Fort Mose, which is where a lot of slaves were trying to escape the British rule. Slaves also tried running, and that kind of resulted in public executions from the British soldiers to kind of like scare other slaves into not taking action. On September 9th, 1739, the largest slave revolt took place. They raided a gun store, and they made an African-American army of 20 men, which isn't really a lot, but they did a lot of damage. They revolted, and they got close to actually beating the British and escaping to Fort Mose, but they ended up getting beheaded and put on spikes so other African-American colleagues wouldn't do so. But the British did not anticipate that this revolt sparked many other revolts along the coast of the United States. What we call the main United States now. Lastly, one of the biggest takeaways I got from this whole like video was the end of it, where it was saying that George Washington also had slaves, which is I actually already knew that, but that's just something that's like not really taught in history books. But yeah, George Washington also had slaves, and during the Revolutionary War, like they would almost fight for their freedom, and there was a all black regiment of 20,000 blacks during that time period. For the age of slaves, 1780 to 1860. I just have a few notes here, just so this video doesn't run over really long. In the 1790s, the oldest crops started to deplete, like tobacco. Tobacco was a really big thing, and it just got overused and overworked, and it started to lose its value. But in Britain, the textile industry started to boom, and this resulted in a high demand for cotton clothing and cotton materials. So during this time, the natives actually lived in a lot of the area that the U.S. like what's now known like what the British needed now, and so the natives were basically kicked out of their homes in order for slave plantations to then so they could crop their own cotton, since the cotton market was so valuable. This ultimately altered the black lives forever, and slavery became even more big than what it was. These slaves are also known as cotton slaves, and they were sold in droves, so they basically doubled what they were brought on the boats for. So when African Americans were brought over from Africa till now, where they actually started doing the cotton and working as slaves, there were double the amount. So just an interesting point to kind of go off of that in order to try and get into the mind of like what it was to actually be a slave. I forget the name of the lady, but she was saying that you kind of have to picture like what you would hear, smell, touch, see, taste, and like kind of feel as you would go out through like a regular day as a slave. For example, like women would walk women and men would walk in chains, more so than men. Men would have chains around their necks and their arms, and they would walk in chain links. And then along with the men, the women would walk hundreds of miles just to get to the plantation, only to then, in the middle of the night, be raped. So it was just like stuff like that, to where like the African American wasn't considered so much as human. And lastly, just from this that I got was the whites kind of believed that, the whites back then at least believed that black people they came from a species that was built to be enslaved, basically. And this is the biggest part for me, is just because it shows the mindset that was going on during this time period, that African Americans really weren't seen as people. And that's all I have for my reflection.